War. Since the early days of mankind, war has ravaged across the globe. In the name of good or evil, to attack or defend, war has created empires and destroyed nations. Since the time of Alexander the Great, results on the battlefield had much to do with the great generals who led their armies to victory or followed them into exile. A great military mind was able to see an opportunity where others saw only a lost cause. A great general was able to develop a plan of attack that could outwit an opponent or respond to an offensive action with speed and agility. In the 20th century came the greatest war the world had ever known. A war between many nations that pitted modern armor, aircraft, and weaponry on a scale unimaginable by the armies of old. World War II. In this war, many were called to greatness. Leaders emerged from small country towns and large urban areas. No nation was more blessed with military leaders than the United States of America. Generals who rose from the ranks to lead their troops to battle. Men who were born to greatness, and men who had greatness thrust upon them. This is their story. The famous generals of World War II. They were legends in their own time and remain so today. Their lives were an inspiration, and their deeds the stuff of history. Here now is the story of General Henry Harley Hap Arnold. General Henry Harley Arnold, or Hap Arnold as he was known to all the world, was the personification of the United States Air Force. He attended its birth. He grew up with it, and he commanded it in its most glorious hour. The gigantic weapon that he created proved one of the key factors in the Allied victory that was won in World War II. But to Americans in the 1940s, Hap Arnold was more than a successful military figure. He was a man of great personal warmth, of uncompromising integrity, and never-failing kindness. In 1911, when getting a heavier-than-air machine aloft was still something of a miracle, Second Lieutenant Hap Arnold was engaged in a project having nothing at all to do with flight and everything to do with launching his military career. He was trying very hard to become a first lieutenant. Meanwhile, the discovery of the Wright brothers was becoming increasingly interesting to the United States Army. The spirit of the Wright brothers, that a practical answer could be found to almost any problem, was to be an inspiration to Hap throughout his life. The Wrights made it seem that anything was possible, creating an enthusiasm among young pilots that was sometimes carried to extremes. When Hap volunteered to learn to fly, his commanding officer said, "I know of no better way for a person to commit suicide." Skeptical as many were, the Signal Corps had made concrete plans to obtain the necessary planes for a course of instruction. In school at the Wright Brothers Field in Dayton, Ohio, Arnold labeled all the parts and learned about airplanes inside out. From Dayton, Arnold wrote to his senior chief signal officer, "Sir, I have the honor to report the following progress made by me in learning to operate a Wright airplane. During the week, I've made 12 flights with an instructor and 1 flight by myself. My instruction under the personal supervision of the instructor in the machine is finished, and from now on, all my flights will be made alone for experience. Very respectfully, Harold H. Arnold, 2nd Lieutenant, 24th Infantry." Hap Arnold was one of the first qualified pilots in the United States Army. In later years, he never lost the glow of pride and the respect for this symbol of achievement. Arnold was the first to win the Mackay Trophy for air reconnaissance, and in 1912, he set a high-altitude record of 6,450 feet. In the earliest days of airmail service, he was one of our first couriers. All this experience in the embryo aviation division of the Signal Corps helped him to train others to fly and put him in the front line of those gaining important knowledge about military aviation. Not only better planes and more thorough pilot training, but more men for servicing planes. These were problems which Hap seemed to grasp with a quick understanding. When World War I came, the nation was still only barely aware of aviation's military potentialities. Suddenly, we were in desperate need of trained flyers. From the ranks of the infantry and from all services, men were carefully selected for the aviation section of the Signal Corps. Even more important was our need for aircraft. Administrative problems, including aircraft production, became Arnold's responsibility. On the home front, Arnold began to learn some lessons that were to have great meaning when he was in command of the Air Force many years later. To produce aircraft for war, one must plan and build long before. Many were the planes and engines finished too late for combat. Arnold firmly resolved that America would not be caught short again. With the war over, the nation relaxed. But for Arnold and other American airmen, this was the beginning of a battle to convince Americans of the importance of air power. Using some old German battleships as targets, Billy Mitchell showed what precision bombing could do. In the post-war years, Arnold was in the forefront of those trying to keep the spark of interest in aviation alive. Stunt flying seemed one of the ways. To average Americans, this was worth watching. Meanwhile, there were real steps ahead, important to aviation's future. Safer parachutes, for example. Observation from the air became a means of keeping forest fires under control. In the winter of 1932, under Hap Arnold's command, there were airdrops of food to the snowbound Indians of the Southwest. This, one of the earliest airlifts, was a prelude to that in Berlin 16 years later. There were also experiments in the field of photo reconnaissance. There was help in the development of new bombers. In these years, Hap Arnold was carrying forth the program of building the Air Corps. He was deeply convinced of its military importance.
His belief in the Air Force, his belief in air power, that air power, the strategic air power can destroy a country, strategic air power can win a war, that strategic air power with minimal support from the Army can win a war. It sort of all keeps going back to that, that air power can do it all if given enough support, and free it up from having to wait on the Army, of having to be basically like an on-call artillery. I mean, the airmen always joke that the Army feels that an airplane is just an artillery piece with a little extra range. You know, that it should be flying around you and you call it down whenever you need it. And the airmen would say, well, that's just a waste of air power, that you've got to have all your planes concentrated and under one command and going after another control, going after, you know, a single target. And in order to get aircraft concentrated, you had to have independent aircraft. You had to have an independent Air Force. So this is how the airmen want an independent Air Force, because they don't feel the Army has treated them fairly in the interwar period, because all sorts of things, which probably aren't true when you look at it, but the airmen just don't feel that they got a shake from the Army. And the Army, I think, the regular infantry and ground pounders always look at it the other way and say, well, we gave them most of the budget, and we gave them this, that, and the other, and they still weren't satisfied. So there's that tension before the war, which is submarined or submerged into war fighting. Supposedly Marshall and Arnold had a deal that Arnold wouldn't campaign for independent air power while the war was on, And then if he did that, if he shut up and fought the war, when the war was over, Marshall would not oppose an independent Air Force.
Helping to build the Air Corps didn't interfere with building a lively family. These old home movies show time passing pleasantly in the Arnold family. They reveal, as do all pictures of Hap, the reason for his nickname, picked up in the days of West Point. The family reflects the dad's good humor, and the dad, growing older and wiser, still exudes the quality for which millions will soon know him. No moniker ever stuck more firmly to a man than to Hap. (1934), the B-10, a new all-metal plane carrying a 2,000-pound bomb load. Then, the fastest bomber in the world. Under Hap Arnold's command, the long-range test flight from Washington, D.C. to Fairbanks, Alaska was undertaken to determine the feasibility of air operations in this part of the globe. Under extreme Arctic conditions, the mission, unusual for its time, was carried out successfully. On his return, Hap was honored with the McKay Trophy a second time. 1938. On the day before Hitler won a victory at Munich, Major General Hap Arnold was appointed Chief of the U.S. Army Air Corps.
Our nation to arm for air defense immediately. A strong Air Force is absolutely essential to keep war out of America.
From the beginning, President Franklin D. Roosevelt found in Hap Arnold someone he could rely on. He respected Arnold's judgment. Together, they saw that time to build and expand had now become precious. Arnold's plans went ahead. Planes were ground support, fighter bombers, long-range bombers, fast interceptors. An Air Force that was both tactical and strategic. Remembering the First World War, Hap Arnold pressed for the quantity production of aircraft that would be necessary for a global conflict, for a war of far greater proportions than the world had ever known. Each day was important now for building planes, for training men, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, and ground crews. The race against time was on. In these months, Arnold worked tirelessly to mold the Army Air Corps into a fully prepared fighting service. Achievement came in spite of opposition from those who, even at this late date, felt that we were well protected by oceans on either side. Pearl Harbor brought into critical focus the need for huge quantities of aircraft and vast numbers of men to fly and maintain them. Well aware of the time and money involved, Hap Arnold had been steadily extending the Army Air Corps training program, coordinating this with our growing air strength. Since 1939, he had fostered the idea of having civilian schools help to train pilots in the first stage. Army Air Corps training had been systematized, and it would include many young men from all walks of life. Not all were needed as pilots, or for that matter, were meant to be pilots. Though some took to the air unsteadily, the huge quotas of trained pilots, mechanics, and other personnel were soon being met. Hap Arnold, a man at a desk with a huge task requiring long-range planning and careful utilization of our limited air strength on a worldwide battlefield. Early in the war, isolated operations began to foreshadow the future effectiveness of long-range bombing. The daring low-level raid on Tokyo was a carefully designed attack which brought home to Japan the real meaning of war. The leader of this successful mission, Jimmy Doolittle, was welcomed home by a much gratified chief. Hap always took great pride in the achievement of his men, and they were made aware of his personal interest. In the following months of battle against the Luftwaffe, American pilots demonstrated a kind of bravery that did credit to the Army Air Corps and that heartened the nation. Key to this effort were the fighter aircraft.
Maybe it doesn't make any difference what kind of bomber they had, but it sure made a difference what kind of fighter they had, because the fighters developed by the Army Air Corps, the P-47, the P-38, big heavy fighters, expensive fighters, not terribly good dog fighters, not very long range. They can't take the bombers into Germany. But the British were scratching around for an airplane. They went to an American firm with British specs and said, here, design us a plane to meet these specs, and the Americans did. The British put the world's best aircraft engine at the time in it, which was a Rolls-Royce engine into it, and all of a sudden you had a P-51. Then the Americans said, if we put enough gas tanks on this thing, it'll take us to Berlin and back. And with that plane, then again, your operations went up, because you could go deeper. You could go in and find places where the clouds weren't, and you could be protected from the Luftwaffe, because the Luftwaffe was so busy defending itself from the P-51 that it couldn't attack the bombers anymore.
Whenever the opportunity afforded, there were frequent visits to his men. Always, Hap was received with enthusiasm and affection. No commander was better liked, more deeply respected. The following is a humorous news story done in the 1940s that highlights the level of involvement for all Americans in the war effort. Hap Arnold, as usual, was right in the thick of things.
And so came that early April morning at an air base in Colorado. 40 flying fortresses line the apron. 4,000 men march out for final inspection. They've trained long and hard with these ships, the 400 men who fly them, and the 3,600 who work to keep them flying. Now the 351st Bombardment Group is ready. By the dawn's early light, it assembles for overseas combat. You're on your way, Joe. This is it. With his staff, Colonel William A. Hatcher, Jr. looks over his 4 squadrons. You feel the old man is proud of you. He finds no fault with you today, nor you with him. You'd fly his wing to hell and gone. Sergeant Philip J. Halls, top turret gunner from Springfield, Missouri. He feels that way. So does his pal Kenny, Sergeant Kenneth L. Halls, ball turret gunner from Perkins, Oklahoma. Related? No. They think they might have been several generations ago back in Germany, but now, just 2 guys with the same uncle, Sam. Meet their pilot, Lieutenant Theodore Argyropoulos of Redding, California. Argy's brother is in the Air Corps, too. Their dad was born in Greece. Yes, the Greeks have a word for it. Fight. Their bombardier, Lieutenant Daniel F. Stevens of Chicago. He can bat 1,000 with a Norton bomb sight. Sergeant Paul J. Posty, ball turret gunner. His dad came from Italy. Paul was formerly a pastry cook. He's got 1 brother in the Navy. Another, a Marine, missing in action. Here's Sergeant Tim Tutchet, tail gunner from Mariana Lake, New Mexico. On the reservation, they named him Aki. That means boy in Navajo. Uncle Sam's boy, too. A few last-minute instructions, and we're off. The compass points northeast. Take another look down there. That's your part of the earth. Out of that desert, those mountains, those fields has grown the American way of life. What you're fighting for. You remember the Colonel's quiet words? Men, the enemy has asked for it. Let him have it. Seek no quarter, nor give any beyond reason. Be firm, be just. And Godspeed you all. 8.5 hours out of Newfoundland, another sunrise. It's rising out of the red of battle, this sun. But 40 more B-17s, 3 minutes apart, have roared across the Atlantic night. The Irish coast looks up to say, top of the morning. And a lake in the Ulster Highlands gives the navigator a checkpoint. Off the Scottish coast, Dernya Craig is a signal for right rudder south, across the English Midlands. Pilots are impatient with the lack of sleep. Head up, boy. Pour on the coal. Let's get there. Yes, it must have been a lot different when the wings carried swastikas instead of these big white stars. Don't worry, folks. We're dropping nothing today, just our hats in the ring. Hello, Missy. We brought something for you and Brother. Chewing gum and chocolate bars. And there's a crate of oranges in the ball turret. Ah, there, Grandpa. We'll be seeing you for a glass of that. And there's the base. 400 acres of dispersal areas. The RAF is on hand to welcome us. Set her down, Colonel. Set her down. The 351st becomes part of the 8th Air Force. We've reached the battlefront. The combat crews move into English barracks. They give them those simple, quiet names for which Americans are famous. 2 weeks later, the ground crews arrive. Hiya, Gus. Great boat trip, huh? Only 7 days and without any escort, too, See any submarines? Oh, 100 of them, huh? Well, I guess you ought to know, Gus. They tell me you was hanging over the rail all day. Next day, big doing. Class A uniform. Shine those buttons. His Royal Highness, the Duke of Gloucester, brother to the King of England, drops in and is greeted by the old man. What's that? Sergeant Major says the RAF is handing over the field to us.
On behalf of the Air Ministry, I hand over this aerodrome complete with buildings and equipment for your safety.
It gives me great pleasure to accept the station on behalf of the United States Army Air Force.
Okay, RAF. If we can fit your boots, we'll walk it straight, brother. Another surprise visitor. General Arnold himself doing a world inspection flight. Tells you tough assignment. This is one head man who knows and doesn't kid. We have the privilege to meet Commanding General 8th Air Force.
Yeah, glad to see you. How are you coming to this camera training film of yours?
Well, it's a little early to tell yet, sir, but we're turning a camera on everything and everybody.
Well, I know what General Arnold had in mind in having you make this gunnery picture. Captain Gable, our gunners are already the best in the business. But if they were only 10% better, it'd cost the Germans another 100.
So fire away, gunner. Plenty more practice before that. Asleep as a forked wolf. Track him. If you don't, you might have to bail out. Over the channel, perhaps. But if you do, a Spitfire of the Air Sea Rescue is bound to spot you. A stubborn, tough gang, this outfit. They'll go after you any time, any place. They picked up men 3 miles off the French coast with Heine defense batteries screaming, "No, you don't." Their answer is always, "Sorry, old boy, we will." You work on your identification of aircraft. Over here, it's with such as this captured Ju-88. There it is. Everything up forward, punched under the nose. But the Canadian pilot says it's a sweet flying ship. Yes, sir. A dangerous all-purpose aircraft. Or the Heil 111K. Here, he's a bad hombre, but he makes good airplanes, gentlemen. These will be a happy sight in days to come. Your fighter escort. That big barrel nose job, circled in white. Your own American P-47, the Thunderbolt, side by side with a graceful spin. These are what you don't shoot at. Today is your baptism of fire. If Lieutenant Argyropoulos ever felt responsibility, he feels it now. In the armament shop, his crew is picking up their guns.
Now remember, fellas, don't let them get too close trying for a sure kill. Your main job is to bring these airplanes back. You got plenty of ammunition. Keep out there at long range.
Oh, we know. They've given you an easy hop. Only 3.5 hours in and out. What they call a milk run. But you'll remember this first mission. Now, you wouldn't show it for the world. But later you find out everybody else felt the same way you did. Second flare. Start taxi. Wing to wing at the start of the runway. He's now slow. Cut somebody's tail off. Rev her up, but ride those brakes hard, Fred. Roger. You're on the tower. Take off. The old man leans full on his throttle. At 15-second intervals, you follow. Form over the feet. You're on your way. Around 3 hours out, Arj looks at his watch. He knows it's time for the fighter escort to turn back. From all over the ship, you watch them leave. You're really on the ball now, because you that enemy fighters will appear any minute. They know exactly where you are. They've been watching the stratosphere condense off your wingtips, giving you away in long trails of magnificent treachery.
Okay, here they are. 9 o'clock high, enemy fighters. Same thing at 3 o'clock.
Yes, at least those vapor trails work both ways. Arch watches the enemy formations as they parallel your course. Seems obvious. They're staying out of range, going out ahead to turn in for a frontal attack high. All turrets swing about to help guard the rear. Top turrets hunt the sky above in all directions. There's some more out there. Keep your eyes peeled. Now it comes. The enemy pours in at you from every point on the dial.
Level. 2 more, 5. Watch it. Get that one at 3. High. Level. No, he's going low. Here he comes up. Smoking on number 4. He's going out and down. Check the chute, you guys. One chute out of the tail. 2 out of the waist. Another 2 points out of the nose. That's 2 more. Pilot the tail. Pilot the tail. Let me know how they're doing back there. Right? Fighter, 6 o'clock. Coming through. Low. High. You got one out of the high squadron. Yep. No chance there. High. Somebody got one of them on the button. That Jerry pilot bailed out. He's not walking away from it.
Still they barrel in at you. A little short on heart, plenty long on guts, this enemy. Another 17 hit. And again, you have to close the gap in the formation. And again they come. 12 o'clock high, 4 o'clock level, out of the sun, and up from the ground.
Did a fighter or a flak get that ship? Flak, I think.
it is. The flare out of the lead ship. The signal for the bomb run. This is your attack.
All right, Steve. We're on the IP. She's yours. I got her. Bomb bay doors open. Make a good run now, Steve. I'm on it.
Yes, make it count, bombardiers. They build these ships around you. Bombs away.
As Hap Arnold went about the vast problem of building American air power, of deciding what types of planes for what specific purposes, a concept began to form in his mind. Perhaps this concept went back to the day when he first saw the plane in which a Frenchman had flown across the channel. That day when he thought, if one plane, why not many in the air at the same time? Now he saw the huge strength possible in mass formations of long-range bombers, each a fortress in the air, a multitude of flying fortresses in continued strategic bombing of the enemy. Meanwhile, destruction of the enemy air force in combat. Air supremacy. This was his goal. This was the biggest task of his life. With production chief Bill Knutson, Arnold toured plants and factories. As time went on, as people came to know who Hap was and the job he was doing, his reputation grew. Deadly serious, but always human. This was the way Hap Arnold did business. Air power. No one was better suited to talk about it than Hap, or better able to put words into action, to mold our Air Force into the strongest in the world. Hap's keen awareness of the significance of air power made him invaluable on the international scene. At many conferences, including Casablanca, Hap was able to work smoothly and effectively with our allies. But here, and for months to come, Hap was to argue for an idea that was not particularly acceptable: mass bombing of the enemy during daylight hours. The plan was not greeted with favor, for at this time the British were successfully carrying out a program of night bombing. While night bombing by the RAF was proving effective, it was General Arnold's argument that daylight precision bombing could cause far greater devastation than was possible during darkness. On the agenda at Casablanca were questions as to whether the limited number of planes could be best utilized. General Arnold's plans received a green light from the other Allied participants. In the Atlantic, serious damage was being caused by German U-boats. To meet the menace, B-24s were assigned to the Anti-Submarine Command. The number of German submarines harassing our convoys began to decline. In the Far East, there were other problems. Arnold went over the air needs of this theater with General Joseph Stilwell and General Chennault. Here it was decided that a difficult flying route over the Himalayas could provide a flow of supplies to the Chinese. The airlift over the hump was one of the extraordinary accomplishments of the war. Hap Arnold, as Commanding General, U.S. Army Air Forces, was a member of the Allied staff which met to determine the future course of the war. Here at the Cairo Conference and at Quebec, Arnold became known for his judgment and common sense. Among leaders of other nations, Arnold was not only the good-natured man with the encyclopedic knowledge of planes and all matters concerning air power, he was a first-rate diplomat upon whom our military staff could depend. By this time, there was complete acceptance of Hap's daylight bombing program by the Allied command. Arnold had won a personal victory in a difficult realm. Pilots had been needed in large numbers early in the war, and with Arnold's encouragement, a women's branch of the Air Force was organized. The Women's Air Force Service Pilots, known as the WASPs, did a tremendous job during the war, freeing many Air Force pilots for combat duty. At the first graduation ceremony, Hap, was the honored guest. By 1944, the program of massive air bombardments began to reach its peak. Now, at last, thousands of strategic bombers with long-range fighter escorts were over Germany at the same time. And now the question was, could this tremendous all-out effort be continued? There was no let-up. There had been thorough planning in every detail that had placed the thousands of planes over Germany at the same time. No one was more instrumental in achieving our long-range plan for strategic bombing of the enemy than Hap Arnold. Through his effort, nothing had been allowed to stand in the way of the plan to use air power to knock Germany out of the war.
It's a war of attrition, and strategic bombing is an attritional form of warfare. Conventional strategic bombing, if you're talking nukes or you're talking annihilation, but just conventional bombs, you're grinding the enemy down. You've got this huge German war machine, and you just keep hitting on it and grinding on it. You may not be able to stop it, but you can slow it down. You can cause all sorts of friction and so forth and make it operate a lot less efficiently. And that all takes its toll. We bombed the aircraft industry, so the Germans dispersed their aircraft industry and made it bomb-proof, basically. But that made the planes produced extremely expensive because they lost all, what do you call it, the economy of effort, because they had small production lines. The train system was overwhelmed because it had to carry parts back and forth to all these little small production lines and carry the finished assemblies all around and the other. So these planes, they produced a great many planes, but they were extremely expensive planes in terms of resources, that caused entirely by strategic bombing. And by the time the planes were reduced, the bombers had killed all the oil plants, and so the planes couldn't fly and they couldn't train anyway. But so it's a kind of thing where you'd have to look at the totality of the effort and say that hitting oil hurt the Army because the Army, the panzers couldn't move without fuel. The Luftwaffe couldn't fly or train without fuel. The U-boats couldn't go without fuel. Then they attacked the transportation system in the winter of 1944-45. German industry stopped. You need coal. Germany's like the Saudi Arabia of coal. And the German railroads themselves were starting to run out of coal, which means the people who were, the means that was carrying the coals from the pit heads to the factories couldn't even supply itself. They embargoed sub-assemblies. All manufacturers' sub-assemblies were embargoed. Sounds sort of obscure, but when you think about it, how can any manufacturing process be done if you can't ship sub-assemblies from one manufacturer to the other? That basically that means that all coherent economic activity has stopped. But that's by February of 45, and by then the war's over anyway.
At the end, we were unmolested in the skies. Total air supremacy. At the close of the war in Germany, at the conference in Potsdam, Hap Arnold participated in plans for the unfinished work in the Pacific. Now able to concentrate full attention on the war with Japan, he flew to bases in the Pacific. Friendly and good-natured, he found what he wished to know without seeming to try. Receptive, even-tempered, he was on the best terms with his commanders, extremely sensitive to their problems. Now, according to plan, what had knocked out Germany could do the same in Japan. The B-29, the pioneer of air intercontinental bombing. The plane which, thanks to General Arnold's convictions and leadership, had been in the works long enough to be ready. 3 months after VJ Day, General of the Army Hap Arnold terminated 42 years of service. Hap lived to see his greatest dream come true. On September 18th, 1947, the creation of a separate service, the United States Air Force. 5 years after retirement, his full life came to a close. He was buried at Arlington Cemetery in January 1950. Hosts of devoted friends mourned his passing. Throughout the nation and the world, there was a sense of deep personal loss. The greatest Air Force in the world had just lost its best friend. Since his time, much has happened, and in many ways what he stood for has come to pass. It was Hap Arnold who sought the best in aircraft and materiel, continuous experimentation, development, progress in the air. He was foremost in urging a separate air force for defending America in the skies. It was Arnold who urged a strategic air command, our global atomic striking force, a massive deterrent to the threat of war. It was Arnold who advocated an air force second to none as a means not only of defense, but of preventing another global catastrophe. Hap Arnold saw the need for greater public interest in matters of air power. Without awareness and support, no nation could expect to remain strong. As the years go by, as we move faster and faster into the age of space, one influence above all seems now more lasting. It was General Arnold who envisioned an institution to train Air Force leaders capable of guiding our nation's air defense, whatever the future. The Air Force Academy, and every person who is honored to attend there, is profoundly touched by his influence. Here there is thoroughness and dedication to the task. The standards at the Academy stem in large measure from the example set by the first Air Force leader, who in June 1949 was made the first General of the Air Force.
From this academy, which was once his
Vision of other leaders with the training, background, and spirit, and with their own vision of what must be done. Such leaders will help keep America free, as did one of the great generals of our time, Henry Harley Hap Arnold.